For more than 20 years, I've been sitting with couples in the aftermath of infidelity. I've listened to the shock, the anger, the shame, the confusion, and over time, some of my own thinking has shifted. I don't say that lightly. There are ideas I once accepted without question that now I see as incomplete. One of the patterns I've noticed, both in the counseling world and in everyday conversations, is how quickly we settle on simple explanations. We like clear conclusions. We like knowing who to blame. We like formulas that make complex pain feel manageable. You've probably heard some of them.
Affairs happen because something was missing in the marriage.
The affair is what broke the marriage. End of story.
Both of those statements can contain truth, but neither tells the whole story. So in this episode, I'm going to push gently, but clearly, against some common assumptions, not to stir controversy for the sake of it, not to minimize the damage of betrayal, but to make room for a more honest conversation. We're going to separate two questions that often get tangled together when considering the post-affair marriage. Who broke it? Who should fix it? Depending on your experience, some parts of this may challenge you. And if they do, please stay with me. My goal isn't to take sides. It's to help you think clearly about responsibility, healing, and what it really takes to rebuild or to let go with integrity. All right, let's start.
Welcome to The Recovery Room, a podcast presented by affairhealing.com.
In this healing place, in this healing place.
Today, I want to separate two questions that often get tangled together when considering a marriage that has been affected by infidelity. First, who broke it? And second, who should fix it? Let's start with the first question. Who broke it? To answer this question, I want to look at three broad patterns of marriage. Now, I realize that relationships are complex and don't always fit into a precise category, but considering patterns, at least in general terms, can give us some clarity. The first kind of marriage we'll consider is the stressed marriage. This is the marriage that typically looks good from the outside. The couple cooperates, they parent together, they show up at family gatherings, they function, but somewhere along the way, their relationship grew heavier, busier, careers demanded more, children required their attention, personal interests became distractions, aging parents needed care, exhaustion crept in, the couple didn't decide to disconnect, it just happened gradually. The energy they once invested in each other was slowly directed to survival. They still value the marriage. They still love each other, maybe in ways different than before. But they feel less connected than they used to. There's disappointment there, maybe even grief. They talk about working on it someday when things calm down. And then one partner forms a connection with someone new. In this context, the affair may not have been premeditated, but it became the satisfaction to an emotional hunger. Someone felt seen again, affirmed, desired, alive. What maybe started as conversation turned into secrecy. What felt like relief became betrayal. When the affair is exposed, the stressed marriage goes into shock. Now here's the part that must be said clearly. Even in a stressed marriage, the affair is 100% the responsibility of the one who chose it. There's no condition inside a marriage that requires betrayal as a remedy. Yes, the stress in the marriage will need to be addressed if both partners choose to stay. Yes, there were vulnerabilities, but responsibility for crossing the line belongs entirely to the one who crossed it. They had other options. Hard conversations, counseling, even separation. Betrayal was not the only path. One of the dangers in this kind of situation is moving too quickly into examining what was missing in the marriage. Now, the involved partner usually has a well-developed list of what was wrong, and because the marriage was stressed, some of it's going to be true. But those truths are often infused with self-justification, so the problems grow larger in the retelling. When we focus first on the symptoms of a stressed marriage, we often mistake them for the root cause. And if we target the wrong cause, long-term change won't hold. If we don't slow down and help the involved partner examine their own internal drivers, their insecurity, entitlement, avoidance of conflict, secrets, unresolved wounds, then simply improving relationship skills will not produce lasting change. Outward adjustments will not hold if the inward work isn't done. I've seen couples improve dramatically for a season, only to drift back into the same patterns months later. Not because they didn't try, but because the deeper issues were never faced. The stressed marriage is how I would describe my relationship with my wife when I had my affair. From the outside, we looked pretty good. Neither of us had any intention of leaving our marriage, but there were also years of patterns that led to emotional disconnection. And because of my personal issues, instead of dealing with these in a way that my wife deserved, I kept things inside and became increasingly critical of her and of our relationship. I wasn't planning on having an affair, but man, I sure stepped quickly into it once the door was open. And if you had asked me why, I probably would have focused my answers on all the ways my wife and I had become distant over the years. I didn't look any further than that. The marriage was the problem, I told myself. Maybe it didn't justify my betrayal, I would have admitted, but I believed it helped make sense of it. And you know what? There would have been some truth in my complaints. But I fear that many counselors would have quickly turned their focus on solving those issues as a way of, quote, affair-proofing our marriage, but totally neglect all the personal issues that didn't become apparent to me for several years. Making our marriage better by focusing on better communication, being more intentional about sex, giving attention to each other's needs, would have made a difference for a while. But I suspect those internal struggles I had never learned to identify or deal with would have eventually resurfaced. I believe well-intentioned marriage counselors often take this approach because they're following a therapeutic model that effectively defines a healthy relationship and works very well in confronting common marriage struggles. But not every model works in every situation. And I contend that the unique trauma of betrayal requires a particular focus, one that must come before switching to relationship change and growth. Failure to do this may result in some short-term relief, but long-term patterns usually reappear before too long. So in a stressed marriage, who's responsible for breaking it? In this situation, the responsibility falls primarily on the involved partner, since both likely contributed to the state of their relationship, but only one chose to break the trust that held them together. Now, let's consider another kind of marriage, the severed marriage. The severed marriage has moved beyond stress into active disconnection. It's not just tired, it's torn. There may be chronic criticism, stonewalling, emotional withdrawal, maybe even contempt. The partners no longer move toward each other. They brace against each other or completely ignore each other. Sometimes the pattern begins in one partner, and over time, if left unaddressed, the other partner often joins in. Their bond frays. They may stay together for practical reasons, children, finances, faith, sense of duty, but the relationship itself feels empty or combative. Intimacy is rare or even non-existent. Conversations feel unsafe or pointless. When an affair occurs in a severed marriage, people often respond with, well, that's not surprising. And it's true that this context makes the vulnerability more apparent. But even in these circumstances, the affair remains 100% the responsibility of the one who chose it. The state of the marriage may explain the risk factor, but it does not excuse betrayal. But here's where nuance becomes important. In a severed marriage, the affair did not create the fracture. It exposed what was already broken. Sometimes both partners share responsibility for the deterioration of their relationship. But in some circumstances, one partner's untreated past issues or emotional shutdown, volatility, or rigid patterns carried more weight into the breakdown. This is where Esther Perel's statement comes into play. She said, "The victim in the affair is not always the victim in the marriage." That sentence unsettles people because it feels dangerous. It can be misused. But when handled carefully, it reminds us that marriage dynamics and affair responsibility are not identical. In a severed marriage, if the couple chooses to stay, they must examine the relationship dysfunction honestly. Both partners will need to face their contribution to the breakdown of connection. But again, none of that dilutes who chose the affair. Two truths can exist at the same time. The marriage may have been broken, but the affair was still unnecessary. In a severed marriage, who broke it? It was already broken before the affair occurred. Maybe each partner was 50% responsible for that break, maybe not. A wise counselor doesn't rush to assign percentages of blame, but they must identify the various dysfunctions that already existed and recognize that the victim of the affair might not have been the victim of the marriage. Finally, let's take a look at the third kind of marriage, the stable marriage. The stable marriage is where some people, even counselors, struggle to believe that an affair can even occur. These couples communicate well, they spend time together, they maintain intimacy, they handle conflict in reasonably healthy ways. They're not perfect, no marriage is, but by honest measures, they are doing well. And yet, sometimes, even in a stable marriage, one partner has an affair. When this happens, there's a strong temptation to do one of two things. Either search for hidden marital flaws or assume the betrayer has a long history of infidelity and they're just repeating a pattern. We think something must have been wrong. Counselors poke and prod. Friends speculate. The involved partner may offer post hoc explanations or excuses. And you can always find something because, as we said, no marriage is perfect. But I've been involved in cases where the marriage itself was stable. It wasn't a relationship problem as much as a personal problem. And in these situations, moving to a quick focus on the couple's shared responsibility to correct marriage issues can minimize the more significant problems that are already present in one partner, the one who had the affair. They may have had identity struggles or unresolved shame, a craving for external validation, midlife panic, long-standing attachment wounds, or a desire to feel powerful or desired in a way that had little to do with the spouse. And if you want an example of this, listen to the 3-episode series in this podcast titled Elisa's Story. Listen, in a stable marriage, the responsibility for the wound falls on the one who broke the trust. That doesn't mean that the injured partner has no role in what comes next, but it does mean we should resist manufacturing marital deficiencies in order to balance out the responsibilities. Sometimes, betrayal is not about what was missing in the marriage. It's about what was fractured inside the individual who had the affair. Let me say that again. Sometimes betrayal is not about what was missing in the marriage. It is about what was fractured inside the individual who had the affair. In a marriage that was stable, the involved partner must take on more of the burden required for healing and for change. So the answer to who broke it may be different depending on the circumstances. We need to make room for various approaches to affair recovery, especially early in the process. Now, let's consider another question. Regardless of who broke it, if a couple decides to keep their marriage, who's responsible for fixing it?
If you appreciate the Affair Recovery Room podcast, we'd like to know. We'd like others to know too. Please take a minute to give us a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever service you use. To those of you who do, thank you so much.
Now we turn to the second question, and this is where couples often stall. Who should fix it? Let's acknowledge that there are plenty of times when nobody fixes it. If either partner chooses to leave the marriage for any reason, there's nothing to fix unless they change their mind. Many marriages don't survive, and some cannot survive without inflicting ongoing harm. But when the choice of both partners is to keep the marriage, or at least work on it to see what happens, who is most responsible for doing the work? The injured partner may say, well, you broke it, you fix it. And that position is emotionally understandable. When you're the victim of betrayal, it feels unjust to carry any additional burden. The involved partner may say, well, I'll work on the marriage if you work on what drove me away. And that position sometimes can also be a little bit understandable, but it often shifts responsibility prematurely. We need to think in phases. In early recovery, the primary responsibility lies with the involved partner. They must tell the truth. They must end outside contact. They must offer accountability without defensiveness. They must demonstrate transparency and consistency. They must gain insight into the why of their infidelity. They must become safe. This work is theirs regardless of whether the marriage survives. It's part of becoming an integrated, trustworthy person. During this early phase of healing, the injured partner is usually stabilizing trauma. They're trying to sleep again, trying to regulate overwhelming thoughts, trying to determine whether reality is still solid beneath their feet. This is not the season to critique their tone or their impatience. In the early stage of recovery, there may be some focus on the couple, but the unique individual needs must be recognized and addressed. Then, if the decision is made to stay, the work eventually shifts. Now, this focus on the betrayer's initial responsibility may make more sense if the marriage was either stable or stressed. But what if the marriage relationship was already severed? What if the cause of the severing was primarily due to the issues the betrayed partner brought into the marriage? Who's responsible for starting the fixing then? Well, I believe the betrayer still needs to start. They don't have to assume the blame for the marriage, but they need to start by accepting the responsibility for the betrayal. Their attitude should be expressed something like this: I broke my promise to stay faithful to you. I accept responsibility for that. I want to do what it takes to earn your trust again and figure out how we can get back to a marriage that is good for both of us. Do you want to be part of that with me? If you're the betrayed partner, you focus on yourself first. You invite your partner to eventually join you in doing the work and be ready to make choices based on what they do or what they don't do. It's always problematic when the betrayer leans back and says, well, I won't do this work until they promise to change the things I didn't like about our marriage. You can't start there. You start with yourself. But then, rebuilding a marriage is never a one-sided effort. Accountability for betrayal is one-sided, yes, but repairing the relationship is not. If the couple chooses to remain together, both partners must engage in change. The injured partner cannot remain permanently in a posture of prosecution, and the involved partner cannot remain in a posture of conditional repentance. Both must eventually learn new patterns. Both must take responsibility for how they show up. Both must risk vulnerability again. Both must participate in rebuilding trust and connection. Well, this doesn't happen quickly. It requires humility, patience, and often professional guidance. It requires a willingness to examine old habits and create new ones. And sometimes, despite effort, one partner refuses to engage. If that becomes the pattern, then difficult decisions may need to be made. Staying in a permanently stagnant dynamic is not the same as choosing healing. What I'm arguing for today is not a softer view of infidelity. It's actually a more demanding one. It demands that the person who broke trust stop hiding behind marital disappointment. And it demands that the injured partner, if they choose to stay, eventually step out of permanent prosecution and into shared rebuilding. That's harder than blame, but it's the only path towards something genuinely new. Why would any couple choose to do this? Why even consider fixing a broken marriage? Affair recovery is so hard. It takes so long. That's the truth. But it's also the very struggle and pain that leads some people and some couples to their most significant changes if they take responsibility for their part in the healing. If you broke trust, own it completely. Don't hide behind marital disappointments. Don't soften your responsibility by pointing to your spouse's flaws. If you were betrayed, don't absorb blame that's not yours. The affair wasn't your fault. But if you choose to stay, you will eventually have work to do as well. Not to atone for the betrayal, but to build something stronger. Healing a marriage after an affair is not about proving who's most right and who's most wrong. It's about deciding whether two people are willing to grow beyond who they were before. And that growth, if it happens, belongs to both.
Fade